So I was talking about, I stopped right around the 3 shifts. So actually there are 5 shifts that really helped me to deliver a more comprehensible thematic unit. So number 1, talked about compelling content curation. This is finding intriguing, engaging materials and tasks that spark curiosity. Number 2, predetermining core structure and vocabulary beforehand. So this aspect of the planning phase really aids in making sure that input is consistent, that it is related to themes, and that it's more equitable in terms of like assessments. Also using pictures and videos to provide input and themes. These activities I usually spread over the course of the unit, and I make sure that input is not just coming from me. And that was another misconception that I had. I just felt like I had to be providing the input all the time. And no, I don't have to be providing the input. I can actually facilitate some of that input, but it doesn't necessarily always have to come from me. Number 4 is using infographics. So this was another great source of incorporating a comprehensible input, making sure that the vocabulary and things that we're talking about were very visual. So I introduced infographics usually in the beginning with minimum text, and then I make sure that I include tiered but multifaceted questions. And these questions go from superficial to deep. And number 5 is using language learner literature. And I have some book sets here that I am going to be talking about, how to include novels throughout thematic units, even when the theme is not related to a novel. So let's get started. Okay, so number 1 is getting a balcony view first. So like my first point was compelling content creation. So what I normally do is I create or I curate all of my activities up front, including the videos, the literary text, and if we're going to do a novel study, or if we're not going to do a novel study, if I want to include some aspect of free voluntary reading with my thematic unit, I try to pre-select the books beforehand so that I can have those offerings ready for students. So this actually affords me the opportunity to see the blueprint of the input that I will be providing. And that input will be largely based on, discussion, me providing input, also students, reading literary text, looking at videos and things like that, but also incorporating what they're learning from that input, the vocabulary and also the structures. Those are going to be incorporated throughout the unit in discussion prompts and just little activities that I'll have coursing throughout the unit. Students, number 1, are better prepared for the reading tasks and the performance-based assessments. And I think they'll have some degree of fluency as well in terms of like the topics. And that's one of my biggest reasons why I love thematic units. Okay, so predetermine your core vocabulary and structures based on your curated content. So I have some examples here. Like, let's just say that I am going to be doing a unit on technology or social media. I love technology, by the way. I have a lot of stories on technology, but I absolutely love it. I love talking about it because it's just it remains a very relevant topic to students at any level. So this is something that we do at our in our level 4. So we have a unit on technology. So what I normally do is I break the unit down into 3 phases, and each of those phases is going to culminate with a range of assessments. Each phase has a short vocabulary list that connects to the topics, the assessments, and also the class discussion. So, for example, if this would be one of the infographics with minimum text that I use, and I'll talk about these questions in just a second. And I have actually a lot of the vocabulary here. So I can use this infographic with my students to actually teach vocabulary. They're looking at the visuals. I can ask them questions about that. So I do want to point out that even though I provide students with a short vocabulary list, that list usually comes at the end of that first phase. So all of the vocabulary that is associated with my topic, we are working those terms in class through infographics, through videos, through input, and then at the end, then I'll give them like a Quizlet list. and that's almost for like security. So by the time they get the list, they're like really familiar with all of the words. In terms of the assessments can range from the formative assessments. Those are usually the first two phases. So it could be 2 questions, like students can answer 2 questions about technology, something that they've learned from doing like an activity like this, or it can be a full-on conversation circle. And again, I'm going to get deeper into these and explain. I did mention this, but I'll mention this again. Students don't receive the list until we've worked the vocabulary in class. And this really is a pivot from like traditional methods, because before I'm like, okay, this is our unit and this is your vocabulary list. But instead of giving them a vocabulary list, I want to show them what the vocabulary is. And I'm going to give you a few examples. So number one of the things that you can do is ignite interest by setting up a gallery walk in class. So rather than giving students vocabulary lists up front, what I do, I print out pictures. Of the vocabulary. I'll have the pictures, kind of around the class. So here's, I printed these out because I didn't want to do the presentation format. So here's one of the pictures here. And I'll put the pictures around class so the students view the pictures. I have them walk around. And then remember, this is upper level. This is an upper level course. So I have them write down words associated with the pictures. Now, they don't necessarily have to write down the vocabulary word, but I want them to think of as many words as possible that they associate with that picture. So that is, this activity can serve as like a diagnostic. As you're doing this, you're kind of looking at or determining, if the list that you have, what you've curated, how you need to modify this based on what students know already, especially if it's like a first or second unit of the year. Like if it's a third or fourth unit of the year, then you should pretty much know what students are comfortable with. And I don't intend for them to write down the exact word, especially if they've been familiar with it. But this really does serve as sort of a KWL and also a circumlocution activity. Another way to engage students with vocabulary is I like to use infographics. So going back to that, let me just backtrack a little bit. Going back to the idea of pictures, here's some more little pictures that I have. And these would be pictures. I got these off the internet. This one, I believe Chris Stoltz, a long time ago, shared this on Facebook, and I remember downloading a bunch of these, and I use these for my technology unit. And here's another one. These are pictures. One thing I like about these pictures is not only can we pinpoint like vocabulary, but we can also get into structures as well. I usually, for the first phase, I don't focus a lot on structures. I actually just focus on the vocabulary. Even doing movie talk or a picture talk, I focus a lot on the vocabulary and I let the structures come later. Okay, so another way to engage students with vocabulary is using infographics with minimum text. And this is sort of like in the beginning. So as I mentioned, I have 3 phases. And my first phase, I would probably use an infographic like this. And then with each consecutive phase, the information that students get would be a bit denser. And that's going to be based on what they've been learning in class. But because I curate all these resources beforehand, I have a blueprint. I know where they're going. So that's where activities like this really come in handy. All right, so I allow for students, I allow for them to use this as a visual reference. Also, I think that this, not giving them the answers, having them figure things out. A lot of times it's my favorite game in class that students know, figure it out. I really would have them kind of try to figure out what, like, if you look at the bottom, you'll see like it says redes sociales, so if they haven't been exposed to that word being social media, then that's something I'll have them figure out based on the icon. So they'll have to infer. And honestly, they really love this type of like exposure to vocabulary and having sort of like a stake in the learning process as well. It's not us spoon feeding them. It's us recognizing like, hey, you are mature. You're in a level 3, level 4 class. And we know that you already come to our class with tools. They can figure things out. And I know sometimes we kind of shy away from that. At least I do. I shy away from that because I think like, oh, I have to provide all the input for you. I have to do everything for you. No, you actually don't. You know, there is, the teacher has a role, and it's also, even though it is a language rich and, you know, language acquisition type classroom, we can also have that gradual release of control, because students are going to recall better, they're going to acquire better and learn better when they are invested in the process and when they are actually doing the work. So, yeah. All right, so moving on. So here you can create, an engagement sheet. I have that in my notes. So this engagement sheet was actually inspired partly by IB. IB uses these different tier type questions. They use 3 different questions, and here I have 5. So the first question that I have, and again, this would be an activity that I do in like a phase, the first couple weeks of my unit. Tier 1 would be to observe and infer vocabulary based on the context and picture. Okay, so I'll have like a little section, and students are just looking at this, and their only job right now is to observe and infer the vocabulary based on the context. And again, we're sort of building a list, but I already have my list. I already know what I want students to sort of, you know, to say, and I know how the curriculum is kind of built, but also I'm still open to, you know, changing things based on their interests, right? So that's the first thing. Tier 2 type of question is they have to look at this again. So I'm using the same thing, and this probably could literally, I have 90-minute periods. I'm telling you, this could probably take about 45 minutes. The old me, when I taught like more traditionally, I would just give students this, and I would like immediately just ask them questions like, how many people are doing this? What do you think this is? I would give them a list of words, and it was really, again, like spoon feeding them, providing like too much input, you know, being a helicopter inputter, I guess, but taking a step back and just letting them process this sort of one tier at a time. So the second one is the who, what, when, and where. So I would ask questions about that. And the questions that I'm going to ask are actually going to embed some of those vocabulary words that I want students to learn, right? So here it talks about people having different social media accounts. So I can ask, you know, ¿cuántas personas tiene cuentas, you know, cuentas de redes sociales, right? And then that vocabulary word will probably be repeated throughout, because that's kind of what this infographic is about. So after the who, what, and when, my level 3 is the how and why questions. And again, they have a level of, they have a certain level of the language, and they should be able to use just really basic words, to talk about the how and also the why, right? Like here is, eres adicto a tu celular, you know? What are ways in which people are addicted? You know, how are they addicted? Why are they addicted? You know, and even this alone, that question alone, we can go into talking about attention engineering. You know, I can talk about, there are people who actually are on the other side of the computer who actually get paid to create clickbait for you. You know, so that, you know, we can totally take that question, to a whole different direction, and bring in still more input, more content, more things that are socially, academically appealing to our students. All right, so number 4 is the personal engagement type questions. So here, I'm looking at the infographic, and I'm going to ask students about, you know, well, you know, do you have a, you know, cell phone, or do you have a smartphone? Do you sleep with your cell phone or smartphone? You know, how many times do you use your cell phone or smartphone a day? How many social media accounts do you have? Which social media account do you like the best? And so, again, these are sort of those personal engagement questions. And I didn't ask that right away. So I'm building up to, you know, get to the point where I can actually ask those questions. And after each tier, what I like to do is I like to actually talk about it. You know, talk about their observations. And this is also an opportunity to provide that vocabulary words, those vocabulary words, and, to provide input. And number 5, which is my favorite, and I don't know if, hypothetically, if I was doing this on within the first week or even the first day, maybe my tier 5 question would be for another day, but that is going to be a discussion and debate question. So, is it, how beneficial is, social media? Like, is it good to sleep with your phone? Why isn't it good to sleep with your phone? Talking about digital boundaries. And so this is just one example of how I approach my thematic unit through a very a CI lens. Okay, so using picture talk to introduce vocabulary as well. So I relied, when I first started doing picture talk, which really is taking a picture and just talking about it using predetermined structures and vocabulary words to talk about the picture. I relied on it many times for verb, like recycling verb structures, but you can also use it to front load vocabulary, okay? So I'm gonna show you one right here. Printed all of these out. So this one, this picture here, you guys are not gonna see my face for a moment, but it's okay. So this picture of a girl whose mouth, you see that she has her keyboard on her mouth, her eyes contain a camera and then Snapchat icon. So here I would emphasize words such as redes sociales, adicción, addiction, taking pictures, uploading pictures, chatting, having different accounts. And also, instead of asking about social media accounts, I can ask about what's in the picture. I can also ask about what's not in the picture, because my goal here, again, with this picture, I would not focus, me personally, I would not focus too much on structures. I would focus just on vocabulary words, because that's what I like to do in the first iteration of my units. So I would ask, I have a few questions here. Ella tiene una cuenta de Snapchat. So does she have a Snapchat account? So that word cuenta is coming up again, okay? Does she have an Instagram account? So we don't see Instagram here, but we can probably assume that, yeah, she probably has an Instagram account. Does she have a Finsta, the fake Instagram accounts? That's the hottest thing now. All the kids are like, what's your Finsta? And I'm always like, well, if it's a fake account, should you be telling people? Isn't it supposed to be secret? Anyway, so also, ella pasa mucho tiempo en las redes sociales. So does she spend a lot of time on social media? Okay. Las personas que están en las redes sociales son muy sociables en la vida real. So now I'm asking questions that are beyond the picture. Do you think that people that are on social media, are they social or very social in real life? My other questions that I'm hitting on my vocabulary words, a ella le gusta revisar su correo. So revisar is to check mail, her email. Ella sube muchas fotos or sube pocas fotos, no? So does she upload a lot of pictures, or do you think she doesn't, upload too many? Ella participa en los foros online. So does she participate in forums online? And then I ask kind of some personal questions about ¿cómo te puede afectar la salud? How can this affect your health? Always being connected to social media, or just always connected to technology. What are the, how could that be detrimental to our health, Or just how could it affect our health? Because obviously I don't want to give them a leading question. So how can this affect our health? And ¿cuáles son los peligros? That's another word that I would have in my unit, because if I'm talking about social media, I'm also going to talk about the dark web, right? And so what are los peligros? What are the dangers of being online so much? So again, this would be sort of like a picture talk. I don't know which way to, this would be a picture talk that I would use to introduce vocabulary, but also, to kind of spark some discussion and spark some debate. And I think that at a level, 2, 3, or 4, students can have a very basic, basic debate about this. Also, another thing, let me make sure that I have, and I think this goes without saying, and I probably am going to mention this later, but I'll just mention it right now. since I, have it fresh in my mind. After doing something like this, I could easily do, special person. This was activity developed by Bryce Hedstrom, persona especial, special persons. And all the questions that I asked about, this picture talk, and I'm trying to front load a lot of my vocabulary. Well, I can ask my students as well, or I can have them do surveys, or I can have them ask each other. So that's one way that they're like getting the input, and also they are outputting, because at the end of the day, kids love to talk. Even if they can't talk perfectly, no one likes to sit and just listen to somebody talk all day. Like, they want to talk. Even babies, right? Babies can't even talk. Like, so that's something as well. Okay, moving on. We talked about using picture talk to introduce vocabulary. I also want to mention that I can use these same pictures. I can do these same pictures to narrate. Like, I can use this picture here, and there was another picture. This is actually from a video. I will share this link later. This video is so good. It's a video on technology. I know this isn't about technology, but I use a lot of videos. So if I were to use this video on, it's called El Peligro de las Redes Sociales. So it's the dangers of social media. And actually, that will be a perfect follow-up to the previous activity. I can use this video and also the screenshots to sort of narrate what people are doing, very much like you do in picture talk or movie talk. And when I do that, and if I move into structures, I'm actually going to start using the two verb construction phrases so that students can hear the actual infinitive form of the verb. So one of the things that I do is I usually give students some type of document. That document will have like the Spanish word. So for this one, like revisar el perfil, I'll use revisar again, like checking the phone, like uploading, downloading, all of those words that we use that are related to technology. I will have a list. Actually, I do have a list here. Okay, I actually have a list. I printed out a list. So here's just to give you an example. So here's my list, right? And I like columns. And one of the things that I do that you can also do is as students have their list, and you have your video or you have your picture, you start narrating what's going on and using two verb constructions. So, I like using le gusta, right? So le gusta revisar, le gusta checar, le gusta descargar videos de YouTube, And as you are going through and you're calling out these verbs, the students, they hear it and they're writing down, oh, well, this is what I think it means in English. So I normally have, I do this a lot. I do this for Spanish 1 as well. I normally have 3 columns. And so one column is the words in Spanish. The second column always have yo pienso, like what I think that word is, and then what the word is, because we will do like a little bit of review at the end. What I like about that is, number one, students have to think. They have to think, but it also gives me input or feedback on the type of input that I'm giving them. Because sometimes I think that I'm just, nailing it right on the head, and I'm just like, oh, that was just such a great, little demo I did for my students. And next thing you know, they're just like, I thought that was toothpaste. And I'm like, what? How did you think that? Well, I need to become a better actor, I guess. So that's one way to do it with the videos. And yes, so that is one way. Any questions so far? Preguntas. No preguntas? Okay, I'm going to keep on going. Okay, so going back to a real world connection. Let's just see. Oh, okay. All right. Let's talk about real world connection. Okay. Also, so again, these are examples from, like if you do like a technology unit, you can apply this to any type of unit. I really like doing real world connections. So when I do something like this, like with technology, for example, I would like to, one way that I can show students some vocabulary, like in a very authentic text, is going to a social media account of a famous Spanish speaking person, like a safe account, with like nice pictures and nothing too scandalous for school, and use specific vocabulary in context, right? So discuss like followers, instead of me telling them what a follower is, discuss, oh, how many followers do they have? Now, right then and there, because they already have a cognitive map of like, social media accounts, they already know, even if it's in Spanish, they know what those icons are. So I feel like that's a really quick win in terms of teaching, vocabulary or allowing them to acquire, that word. So I would discuss like followers, for example, how many pictures they upload in a day. So I'm using that word picture and I'm using the word upload. How often people comentar on their pictures. For movie talks that I use, I tend to, so I'm moving to movie talks now. So for movie talks, one of the things that I really like to do, and again, I know this probably isn't, a traditional way of doing a movie talk, but I don't show the movie talk first. The first thing that I do is I normally show the screenshots of the movie talk, or the video. We can just say video, the screenshots of the video. And I narrate those things a little bit, but I never narrate what happens at the end. I always like to leave that part, like once they see the video all the way through, I like students to kind of, have that, have that surprise, and, I like to build a little bit of suspense. So by the time they get to the end, they're like, oh my gosh, I couldn't wait to see this. So that's one way. Again, this is a way to control for structures, but also it's a really good way to, embed very pertinent and necessary vocabulary, the vocabulary that's related to the themes that you're talking about in class. Okay, and just some other things that I do. PQA with the vocabulary, so that's personal question activity, which is a lot like special persons, where you are asking students questions related to the theme, but I always embed the vocabulary in the questions, because this is one way, to get them, talking and using those words. So asking them like how many times, how many times they check their social media, or we just actually did a unit on identity. And the first phase of that unit, students had to just talk about themselves. So like some of the vocabulary was about, what type of, well, it was social media was embedded into that. What type of applications, they like, what type of hobbies and things like that. And they get an opportunity to use that vocabulary as well. I think I mentioned this, but a survey with the vocabulary unit, something that's very personalized. So it's kind of the same thing as a PQA or special persons, but in a survey format. And you don't have to use all of these things together. You can just pick and choose. And I have to say that of those three, I think special persons is probably my favorite, because a lot of times, as students are talking, the other students actually are writing down. Well, this is kind of how I do it the Bryce way. Students are summarizing what, the speaker is saying. And again, they're recycling, those words again and recycling those structures. Last, but definitely not least, one of the things that I love to do, you guys know that I'm a big free voluntary proponent. Like I love FVR since I've been doing it. Actually, I probably was, actually wrote a few novels before I got really invested into FVR. And then I was just like, wait a minute, like, how can I be a writer and not be doing FVR in my classroom? A teacher called me out on that one time. They're like, you need to do this right now. And so I did. So my last point is, one of the ways in which you can comprehensify your thematic units is to add some language learner literature, okay? So I have some books here that I'll talk about in just a second, but just to give you some options. Number one, you can read a book or you can read a short story that's related to your unit. So you can read that to students, or if you get one of those stories like off of Teachers Pay Teachers, or a teacher who's just, there's so many teachers who offer, short stories that they do in class. If it's related to the unit, that's something else that students can read. Like in my case, again, I really love technology. So when I do any unit related to technology, one of my favorite short stories to read is, and I wrote it, is Mi abuelita tiene un móvil inteligente. So my grandmother has a smartphone, and it's super funny, and it's like all the technology vocabulary you ever wanted is in that story, but in a very tasteful and creative way. So I would definitely use stories, or you can actually just use, you can read a book to your class that's related to your theme. So if I'm doing one of the books that I'm going to be reading to my students, we are going to start a unit on relationships. And I'm actually going to be reading this book that's by Terry Jensen, Caras Vemos. And I'm just going to read like a chapter every day to my students. I do have activities that I have students do while I read. So like the first time that I read it, I'm just having them listening, listen to what I'm reading, and I ask them questions, check comprehension. But then after that, I give them little activities so that they can, so that the reading and listening is a little bit more structured, and then they have like a purpose to it. So I did this last year with El Escape, and that is one of my books. We read, where is it? Here it is, El Escape here, which I know it's about technology. Guys, I promise you I will find more things to write about. I just really love technology. And so what you can do, how to incorporate reading a book or a short story with your theme. So here are just some ideas. So with this book, again, Caras Vemos, or I can choose any of the books that I have, you can gather 2 to 3 pictures related to the book. So like as you're reading, you can actually have projected like some type of visual connection to what you're reading. You can distribute listening sheets like I do. And normally I don't grade these. So I am like the queen of grading, but I do not grade the listening sheets because I see this as students kind of honing their discriminative listening skills. Okay, so it's like pleasure listening almost. And it actually gives them, some feedback as well. Like when they don't understand things, what strategies can they employ to actually, comprehend better? So that's one thing. Read and then check comprehension. So like read and then actually ask students questions. And also having students they can take turns retelling different parts of the story. So, and that can be done in English or in Spanish, whatever you feel comfortable with. So that is one way. With a plethora of readers out there now, you can also do literature circles around a theme. So I have a few bundles here. I don't know which one to start with, but so here, let's see. Let's say you're doing a story. You're doing a unit on relationships. Okay. So here are some books on relationships. So I have Secretos, La Novia, Las Apariencias Engañan, El Amario, El Último Viaje. Actually, this should not have been in that pile, but these are examples for like relationships. And then like if you're doing something on like celebrations, or actually before I talk about celebrations, if you're doing something on like revolutions, right? Like change or revolution, here are a few books for that. So El Escape Cubano, Libertad, Casa Dividida, La Hija Desastre. So if that's your theme, you can always get like a few copies of each of these books, have students choose, get into literature groups, literature circles, and then read. So if you're doing something related to the environment, like I have here, I have Meche y las Ballenas, Robo en la Noche, Noche de Oro, and 48 Horas. And that last one is by Carrie Toth. Let's see. Oh, I forgot to mention this for friendship. relationships. Cómo salir de la zona de amigos. Put that over there. All right. And then I have some here that are like mysterious, like thrillers, kind of adventures. We have El Entierro, La Ofrenda de Sofía. Okay, I'm not going to try to pronounce that. Help me, y'all. This book here. This was Los Piratas del Caribe, El Escape, and Las Sombras. So let's see, what other themes do we have? We also have, okay, so here are some other books. So I think this was, I don't know if this was Legends, but I'll just show you. La Llorona, this should go with my mysterious pile over there. And then Vida y Muerte. All right, and last but not least, so these are, I should have written, I know what these are. These are both relationships. Yeah, this is also relationships. So we have Los Sueños de Xochitl, Soy Lorenzo, Todo lo que brilla. Sorry. Relationships and famous people. Felipe Alú, Selena, El Callejón de Beso, Julio, Tres Amigos, Camino de Café. I have a lot of books here. So those are just some examples of how you can, use these books as a way to really sort of give students more access to the theme, but also to make sure that, they are, building their vocabulary. The books are very comprehensible, so it just ties in perfectly to, maybe having tying perfectly into the theme, but also making sure that it's comprehensible enough for students. So if you have any questions about how to approach thematic units with CI, I'll be here for a few minutes. Please ask away. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I actually worked today too. We had a half day, so right before this started, I was dismissing kids and talking to the custodians, and so I know that's really busy, but I really hope that this has been helpful for you, and please give me feedback. If there was something that I didn't talk about that you'd like to know more about, please let me know, because I think for me sometimes, I do so much, and sometimes I have a hard time distilling everything down to, okay, like I want to focus on everything, but let me just figure out, this sort of little narrow piece right here, what I can, kind of, contribute, my little dos arenitas, my dos granitos de arena. So yes, if there's something I didn't cover that you would like me to cover, please let me know, and gracias.